Hi everyone, thanks for watching my video. Today I want to show you how to make two different styles of masks. One has elastics that wrap around your ears. It's great for quick taking on and off. And the second is a style with cotton ties. It is a little bit more comfortable for long-term wear, and it also provides a little bit more in terms of adjustability when you're wearing masks. So first off, you're going to start with 4 pieces of fabric for each mask. You're going to want 2 for the inside layer and 2 for the outside layer. If you're using a fabric that is different on both sides, like this one with the green dots, you're going to want to make sure that you cut opposite directions so that it ends up being like this on your face when you sew your mask. Otherwise, if you cut them in the same direction, it's going to look like that, and it's not going to have the same pattern on the outside that you want. If you're using a fabric that is the same on both sides, you're good to cut all of your pieces in the same direction. For the green dot, I'm going to be making it with elastic, so I've cut 2 pieces that are 8 inches. For the blue stripes, I'm going to be making them with bias tape so that they have straps. These are 2 pieces of bias tape that are each 40 inches long and will run across the top and the bottom of the masks. You're also going to need 4 pins like these, or I like to use 4 small binder clips. They make it so that you can still secure fabric in place, but you don't put extra holes in your masks while you're sewing. This is a cardboard cutout that I made from a pattern that I found online. This is the size that I use. It's an extra small, but I also have 2 other sizes, a small medium and a large extra large that I use. I'll be sure to link the pattern into the comments section of this video so you can check it out. I also like to use this rotary blade when I cut a lot of masks at one time because it makes it really easy. I'm also sure to cut all of my fabric on a self-healing mat like this so that I don't ruin any surfaces in my house. So let's start with the mask that I'm going to make with elastic. I'm going to turn the 2 right side faces of the outside of the mask facing each other so it's correct on the inside and it looks inside out on the outside. I'm going to do the same thing with the inside. Mine has some dots on it that should be facing each other, but if you're using plain white, this step doesn't matter. The goal is going to be to sew along this curved edge on each one of these pairs of fabric. We're going to take some pins and start pinning. I like to use 2 pins per side just to make sure that it's secure at the top and the bottom before I start sewing. So go ahead and pin the top and bottom of each of these. You're going to want to leave about a 1/4 inch seam allowance for each of these while you're pinning and while you're sewing. So let's go over and start sewing these curves. So while you're sewing with a straight stitch, you're going to want to make sure that you're trying to keep the 1/4 inch seam allowance that I had said before. If you're a little bit off, that's going to be okay and it's still going to turn out great. What I like to do when I'm sewing a lot of masks at one time is stop the machine and put the second piece in right after the other. That way there's very little waste in thread and you can just cut them apart at the end. When you're finished, cut your pieces off from your machine and you'll see that your 2 pieces are obviously sewn together still. Carefully cut those apart and you're ready to move on to the next step. Both of our pieces are still inside out right now, and the next step we're going to do is take a piece that's going to be the inside of our mask and turn it inside out so that the nice seam is facing outward, like this. You can see here that the 2 sides line up great, and you can flatten it down. I do recommend ironing if you have an iron, and you can see that the seam is well hidden. So the next thing you're going to do is open up the pieces that are sewn together that are going to end up being the front of your mask. You're going to take the inside piece and you're going to try and line up that seam with the inside seam of the front of your mask. It should line up pretty well. If it's not perfect, that's also okay. When you stitch it together and turn it inside out, it'll look great. What you're going to do now is line up each piece and you're going to put a pin or a clip on all 4 corners. This is going to hold each side in place as you're doing the next step, which is going to be to sew along the top and the bottom, leaving 2 holes on either side of the mask. So this looks great. It's pretty secure and will hold its shape while I'm sewing. You can also see that when I look inside, it's got both the right sides facing each other. So what we're going to do now is we're going to line up the top of the mask in our sewing machine, and we're going to try and keep the 1/4 inch seam allowance that we've been using. We're going to run a stitch all the way across the top, making sure that both of the layers are intact and so that they will be sewn together. When you get to the center seam of the mask, it can be a bit tricky, so I do like to straighten my mask out and kind of turn it inside out so that it lays a little more flat. I also hold down the seam 1/4 allowance from before and sew that way so that it lays flat and doesn't bunch up. So when you get to the end here, this is a good stopping point if you'd like to sew more masks, to just keep adding them on and then cut them apart as I had shown you before. I'm going to take this mask and I'm going to sew the same way that I did on the other side. The only difference that I'm going to do is this 1/4 seam allowance in the middle. I'm going to flip the opposite direction so that it's facing the same direction as the one that I sewed on the top portion. That way it will lay in the same direction. So this mask has almost all of its seams sewn and it is almost ready for elastic. The next step that we're going to do is take the mask and we're going to turn it inside out from either of the holes on the side. As you can see, it's already looking a lot better than it did about 2 seconds ago. So now we're going to try and lay the mask flat and create the cup shape that will hold your face as you're wearing it. You're going to want to try and get your mask as flat as possible, and I do recommend ironing at this step if you have an iron. So the next step that we're going to do is tuck the sides in at an even length on each side. So flatten your mask in half like this and take one side, and what you're going to do is take your fingers and tuck the sides under on each other so that it looks like this. You're not going to want to tuck a ton because you still want the length across your face after you sew the elastic on. So tuck it sort of like that, and then you're going to want to secure it with a pin or a clip. I do recommend ironing after this. This is the most important step, and you want to keep that tuck there, otherwise the elastic may not hold as securely. So do the same step with the other side and make sure that you line those up as closely as you can so that it's even on your face after you sew. So the next thing to do is iron these flat. You can use a regular iron, you can use a hair flat iron, but you want it to hold its shape like this on its own. So now what we're going to do is take our elastic strips and we're going to tuck them about 1/4 of an inch into each corner and then secure it again with either a pin or a clip. I do find that the clips are a little bit easier in this step because pins are a little tricky to hold elastic on. So now what we're going to do is we're going to sew a straight line across where the elastic is and close that hole up on the side. I like to make sure that I use the reverse button on mine so that I go over the elastic 3 times. So you'll see here, I will go over it once like this. I'll reverse my machine, go over it again to reinforce that stitch, and then the 3rd time is right then when I start going in the right direction. I do that for each corner. You don't have to do that, but I do find that it helps with the security of the elastic in the end. So when you're finished with that seam, you're going to want to carefully cut the mask off. And you can see that even with the reinforced stitch, it still looks like a nice, clean, straight line. If it's not a clean straight line, as long as the elastics are secure in there, you are good to go, and it doesn't really matter what your mask ends up looking like as long as it's functional. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and run the same stitch along the other side, making sure that the elastic is securely tucked in. And there you have it. That is your finished mask with elastics. What I'm going to show you next is how to make the mask with cotton ties. So what I did was I followed all of the steps up until the elastics. I got rid of the elastics and I still sewed that seam shut on either side so that there aren't any holes. I did do a double seam just to reinforce those holes shut. So now what I've got here is some bias tape. You can make bias tape on your own by folding over fabric and ironing it, or you can buy bias tape that's already made for you. The goal here is to line the bias tape up while it's open on the flattened mask. So pull your mask tight and make sure that you line it up on the inside of your bias tape. What you're going to do is hold it in a secure fashion and fold your bias tape over so that it lines up while holding the edge of the mask. I do think that the binder clips play a crucial role when you're trying to sew cotton ties onto a mask because the pins don't quite hold it as securely as the clips do. You could probably get away with using some sort of chip clip if you have them around the house and don't have binder clips available. So make sure that your binder clips are able to hold your bias tape on there even and securely. I also like to go along the bias tape edges and just put a few extra clips so that it keeps it held in place while I'm sewing. So what I'm going to do now is sew a zigzag seam all the way around the bias tape so that it holds together and also holds onto the mask. This is going to take quite a bit of thread, and so you're going to want to make sure that you have enough before you start. This also is why tie masks generally cost a bit more and take a little bit longer to make, because they do take extra resources, including fabric and thread. When you're finished sewing your very first piece of bias tape along the top of your mask, you're going to want to take your second piece of bias tape and flip your mask upside down so that you can sew the second one across the bottom in the exact way that you sewed the first one. There you have it, a complete cotton mask with cotton ties. One last thing that I like to make sure that I do is take the raw edges of the ends of the bias tape and knot them over so that the seams don't fray or fall apart at all. This also adds kind of a nice aesthetic, I think. Masks with the cotton ties are extremely comfortable for long wear use because they don't have the elastics that can sometimes pull out of your ears if you're wearing them for long periods of time. And there you have it, 2 different types of masks that you can make at home. I hope this video has given you the confidence to try it yourself.